Today is day 3 of our sheep show here, last day, Saturday morning. It's actually day 6 of our virtual show, which started on Monday. And we've got 2 seminars today. And the first one is with our good friend Remi Warren. We thought we'd change things up a little bit. If you folks have been able to join us for some of the other seminars, we've had all sorts of different presentations and slideshows and videos, and Remi is one of those guys that is just an absolute wealth of knowledge, especially in western big game hunting. And so instead of a talk to you type of presentation, we thought we'd do more of an open mic and throw it out to you folks and also the folks online to fire some questions at Remi. So Remi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming down here. Just briefly, Remi is one of those guys that you see online, you see him on television. He started off as a guide and outfitter in the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, which is close to home to me. I lived in the Bitterroot for 20 years and expanded his interest in his business to booking hunts in Africa and New Zealand, I believe. And at some point, he figured out, hey, I'm going to start filming my hunts. So he self-filmed some hunts and got involved in producing a television series for the outdoor channel Apex Predator. Remi's got a kind of a unique approach. He is one of those guys that really studies animal behavior. And not only the game that he's pursuing, but the predators that pursue them. And took that as an approach to his hunting, and certainly has been successful with that. He's branched out. He's a co-host of Solo Hunters, which is another show on the Outdoor Channel, and I guess in spare time, if there is any, he's an editor for Western Hunter magazine. So well-traveled Western big game hunter in the world of social media now, where everybody seems to be an expert. I spent a lot of time in the fly fishing industry. That's another one of my vices, and there's a interesting slogan going around there going, hey, do you even fish, bro? For all these self-proclaimed experts. Well, I'm here to tell you this bro hunts. So Remi, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I just appreciate you all coming out and everybody that's joining us online. I know some of these seminars, there's something that I could sit down and teach on one topic, but one of my favorite things is to kind of converse with everybody and know, what do you want to know? I feel like I feel very fortunate to have spent a lot of time in the outdoors through guiding, through my own personal hunts, as many as 323 days in a single year. I clearly did not have a girlfriend or anything else going on at that time, but over the course of that, I feel like I've gained a lot of knowledge, and I like to be able to answer questions that people have on maybe specific things, or any questions that you might have in hunting. One of my favorite times of year is I still guide an outfit, and to be around the hunting camp and to converse with the hunters that we have in camp. And so I thought, if we can do that, kind of recreate that same kind of feel here, we can just talk hunting. That's what I love. That's what I love to do. And I'd love to talk hunting with you guys. I know there's going to be some questions coming in from online, and then definitely a lot from the people in this room, hopefully. So the success of the Q&A relies on the Q, and then I'll bring the A. So you guys bring the questions and I'll bring the answers. And if nobody has any questions, Keith and I can just talk about mule deer hunting up here for 2.5 hours. So.
Which is easy to do. That reminds me, so we've got mics here for the studio audience. And for the folks joining us online, there's a Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. That's where you can type in your questions. I did not know this, and Remi just pointed this out to me. We both lived in the Bitterroot Valley, and in 2005 we were both unknowingly chasing the same mule deer. Sorry, but I beat you to it.
Yep.
But you also killed a great buck in that unit, so.
I did, yeah. Yours ended up being the state record, but I think mine at the time was the state record archery buck. So it was a good give and take. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very memorable deal for me. I was new to Montana. I moved here with my family in 2000 and went to work for the Boone and Crockett Club, which is national headquarters in Missoula, Montana. And I just started asking people, you know, hey, where should the guy put in for stuff? And this Unit 270 kind of rose to the surface, and it was only an hour from where I lived. And back then, you got the tags in the mail. They didn't do the, you know, you were successful online. So I got this thing, oh God, I drew this tag. What do I do now? So started asking everybody I could, talked to biologists, game wardens, got a bunch of intel, got maps, and just took it as this is my hunt for the year. I'm going to go all in. Scouted, went through the archery season. Opening day, had a tremendous buck at 80 yards, couldn't close the deal on him, and then just kept hunting and kept hunting. And what a tremendous area this is. It's part of the upper end of the Bitterroot Valley where we had a major forest fire several years earlier, and the regrowth just created a mecca of habitat for the deer and elk in there. And yeah, I was fortunate to finally come across this deer. I passed up numerous bucks. Some I regretted, but in the final throws, it turned out pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was the state record, typical for 2 weeks. Yeah, interestingly, in the state of Montana, and I support this, if an animal is taken illegally, and whether it's poached or out of season or what have you, and the game department confiscates that animal, and if the game department enters that animal into Boone and Crockett's records on behalf of the citizens of Montana, Boone and Crockett will accept that animal. Not acknowledging the illegal activity behind it, but the state grew that animal, and the animal should be recognized, which is part of Boone and Crockett's mantra. So a deer was poached the year before mine, and it finally made it into Boone and Crockett's system. So mine was a state record for 2 weeks, and then this buck came in, and they officially scored it and entered it. So.
Wow, I actually didn't know that.
Fun facts to know and tell. That's what a Q&A is about.
That's cool. Well, let's open it up. Does anybody who wants to start it out for us? Anybody got some questions, or we can even go online? Uh-oh, I know this man. This could be a trick question.
It's not too tricky.
Okay.
I don't want to know how you prepare physically for the season, because you're an animal and you do this all the time. But you've got a lot of experience with people coming to you, and folks pursue a lot of strategies: CrossFit, weightlifting, running, so on. From your experience with hunters, what do you think is the best thing, other than what you do, that people have done, that they show up and they're ready to do what you need them to do on the mountain?
Yeah, when it comes, and I've said this many times, but I think when it comes to fitness and hunting, my philosophy is always kind of build that muscle memory by doing, which isn't always, you're going on a 7-day elk hunt and you're going to be hiking all day for 7 days with a heavy pack on. And you can't do that all the time. You get off work or whatever, but I think a couple things that stick out in my mind is just weighted pack training, putting that pack on, putting your boots on, walking around with it. If you can get some incline, obviously do that. For me in the off season, it's always doing something along those lines of putting the pack on, going and looking for sheds, just hiking. We're fortunate out west that we have access to mountains, but I know that everybody doesn't have that. And then mixing in other kinds of cardio, because it's pretty much how you're able to continue going day in, day out. So one thing that I've even tried to do is try some different stuff that maybe people that don't have mountains can do. It might be like stationary biking, jogging, building that really good base of cardio. And then another thing that I've found is if I'm doing some kind of workout for it, or one thing that I suggest to clients that they've said really helps them in the past is, maybe they say, I've only got an hour. How do I replicate hiking all day in an hour? And I think that it kind of is getting your body used to hitting its max. So putting that heavy pack on adding more weight than you might, and then going at a higher speed in a steeper incline. So if you've got an hour and you've got access to a hill, or maybe you've got only indoor equipment, you can put the treadmill on an incline, getting that incline hiking, but kind of burning yourself out, getting your muscles used to getting tired and then recuperating, getting tired and recuperating, because it's kind of similar to being on that long hunt where at some point you're gonna get tired and you just gotta keep going, getting your body used to not stopping. I know there was a time where I would be like out on my own, and there was this one hill, and I remember one thing that really helped me in the mountains was I started climbing this hill, and the first time I did it, I had to stop, and I was like, I'm just gonna do this without stopping. No matter how slow I go, just pushing on one foot after the other, building that repetition of moving my feet when it gets difficult, and that in the long run has helped. And then of course over the years, you know, I've built up that base of hiking with a pack on because I do it a lot. But for most people, the clients that come out and hunt with us, I always recommend, you know, breaking in their boots, working out in their boots. Wearing boots is heavy. They say like a pound on your feet is equivalent to 8 pounds on your back. So practicing wearing your boots, practicing wearing your pack, and get comfortable in that situation that you're going to find in the field. And whether you do it over a short period of time where you're just adding more energy in a shorter amount of time, or whether you can go out on the weekend and get some good hikes in, I think that's the best way to prepare.
Interesting, Remi. That echoes seminar we had yesterday with the Mountain Tough Fitness Lab guys. You're right on with what they were saying. Is a lot of us think, well, we're going to train for a specific hunt, and their takeaway was just stay active all year long. Just be doing something, be active, and work yourself toward that by those type of repetitions. Just thinking that you're gonna, a month out, start hiking, you're not gonna get there.
If you make it a year-round thing, it makes it, I know there's like, I've had guys that are like, I'm going sheep hunting or elk hunting in September. It's like, well, August starts. It's a lot easier to get into it now in January and just do something every day, whether it's some form of hiking, walking, whatever, and then you can always ramp that up. I know, me personally, if I have a hard hunt coming up, I do everything throughout the year, but I'll even, make more time to do a little bit more weight in my pack. Of like, if I'm going on a backpack hunt, one thing you don't want to do is, you don't want your first 40-pound pack into the mountains to be the day you show up on your hunt, because you're gonna be sore in a certain way that pack did. I know before I went sheep hunting this season, we were backpacking about 2 weeks, and before that, I put 60 pounds in my pack, and for 2 weeks before that hunt, hiked every day, is in the mountains, straight like morning or whatever before I was working, just did that weighted pack. I wanted that weight, so even just those little muscles that feel that weight. The first day on my sheep hunt, was like, well, I've been doing this, ramped it up to what was comparable to the hunt that I was going on right beforehand, because I know some people that first couple days, the hardest day generally on a backpack hunt is your first day in and your last day out, because hopefully you're extra weight out, and on the first day in, you're probably going a further distance. You've got all your camp, you're cold, everything's, your muscles are cold, you aren't used to walking yet. That first leg out of the truck is always the hardest for pretty much everyone, but just having that like repetition of exactly what you're gonna do right before you do it prevents you from getting sore and allows you to kind of hunt harder throughout the week, in my opinion.
Very cool.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What is your knowledge and or experience with Nevada spike hunting during the rut season?
So spike elk you're talking? Yeah. So one thing with spike elk is you kind of can hunt spike elk like you hunt cows, or like, I would say you hunt spike elk more like you hunt cows. Now, during the rut, during September, what happens is the spikes are gonna be the ones that are the satellite of the herd, and they're kind of just trying to figure things out. So what I would do is I would generally, just like I would anything else during the rut, so for the big bulls, you're looking for the cows. For the spikes, I would be looking for the cows as well, but you're gonna kind of look on the periphery of where the main action is. A lot of times you'll find pockets of spikes, even they're kind of doing their thing on the outskirts of where the main action is, because they're the first ones to get run off. I've been watching a big open area, and here's a bull running some cows, and one day I watched a spike try to get in on that herd, and that bull just beelined it toward that spike, ran him off, and on the edges of the main action is where most of the spikes are kind of circling around. They're like the little baby sharks circling, and the bigger sharks are in the middle eating, because they know that it's not really their business to be running, but they have also trying to figure things out. One thing that I've learned as well is if you were just to target spike elk, a good tactic during the rut would be to kind of get on the edge of where the bulls and everything else are and make cow calls, because they're generally the first ones to kind of peek in and see what's going on. They want to see if they can kind of get in on the action before they get kicked off. They're like looking to sneak a cow away, and so kind of staying back from the herd but using cow calls tends to work pretty well.
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of parallel to that is, okay, how do you work a herd bull? That's got to be I know that's a different animal entirely.
Yeah, when it comes to calling a herd bull, that's a completely different ball game than calling even immature bulls, or I would think that like immature bulls and spikes act different than each other, and then mature bulls, especially a bull that's controlling the herd, is going to act different as well. There's a lot of, I remember when I was kind of growing up hunting and reading articles and things about elk hunting, and there was this like main theme that was, you can't call a herd bull away. It was like it's impossible to call a herd bull in, and I'm like, that just seems like a very bold statement. And I'm the type of person, when it comes to elk hunting for me, especially during the rut, I like to call, and I absolutely know that it is 100% possible to call in a herd bull, and actually might be easier in some aspects because they act a certain way. But you have to understand that they're acting like an elk that's controlling the herd, and you have to use tactics that would maybe pinpoint a weakness of the way that bull's acting. I think one of the things, or one of the tactics that I have used extremely successfully when calling a herd bull in is something that I call dogging a bull. So what's happening is the herd bull has control of the herd, and he has to fight to keep control of that herd. But when there's other elk bugling, he kind of has this, do I need to expend energy fighting these weaker elk, or can I just move my herd over here or push the herd over here and avoid a confrontation? And so a lot of times when I'm specifically trying to target a herd bull, I'll do a couple things. The first thing is I always bugle like I'm meaner and badder. I think that a lot of people are afraid of bugling mean. I think a lot of people are afraid of being extremely aggressive. And if another bull is ever going to take a herd, he's going to be extremely mean and extremely aggressive. So I like to match the tone of the bull that I'm calling to. If it's a herd bull, I'm going to be as aggressive, as loud a bugle, a lot of growling, a lot of chuckling, and it's a more aggressive style of elk calling. I'm not going to be timid. I'm not going to back down. I'm going to cut off his bugle, and I'm going to do things that piss him off in a way that would make him come in. Then I also know that I have to do another thing, which is get in tighter to the group, because he's not going to leave the cows to go fight. He owns them, and in the wild, a bull that's challenging the herd bull has to go to the herd bull. And I don't know why we have in our heads that we're going to call that bull away from his cows when if I wasn't an elk hunter or caller, that other elk that's challenging would never expect that bull to come to him. That other elk is saying, I'm going to come take your cows. So you have to get in the mindset of a bull that's going to take a herd bull's cow. You got to do those kind of calls, and you got to be aggressive and push toward that bull. And by doing that, I've been really successful calling in the bull that controls the herd.
Here's a question I have for you, and I observed this one to get your take on it. I was hunting elk in eastern Montana and kind of zeroed in on a herd bull that had some cows, and they were kind of doing their thing, and he was kind of, running back and forth, keeping an eye on things, and he'd bugle every once in a while. But off in the distance, there was just a real faint, what you would perceive as a young bull, screechy bugle. And he was off in the periphery, and I could tell this bull was not paying any attention to that. And then, you know, slowly over time, this little screechy bull was coming closer and closer. And I'm going, well, this other bull's going to show himself. I was not in a position to do anything with this herd bull. I was surrounded by his cows. I plugged into, I picked the wrong approach, but anyway, I was going to watch. All of a sudden, this whiny, spiky bull popped out and just threw a guttural, massive bugle, basically changed his tone, and he was every bit of, you know, 340 bull. This other bull was a 340 bull, and when he stepped out and changed his tune, this herd bull came off the hill and they went at it. It was just a unbelievable sight to see, epic battle. But I'd never seen that before, where a bull, a mature bull, was kind of hiding his position in the herd until he was at a place to challenge.
Yeah, I think one thing about elk bugles is a lot of times when an elk is actually bugling, he's not bugling to another bull, but he's actually bugling to cows. So when you hear a bull in the distance bugling, he's trying to locate cows, and maybe that bull is thinking, hey, I wonder if there's other cows here. And then this bull over here might fire off and say, he's saying no cow, like for the cows that he doesn't have, don't go to that guy, come to me. So, you know, a lot of times you think, oh, a bull, you bugle to a bull, and I'm like, I'm getting that bull to respond to me. But in that bull's mind, many times, he's like, I'm responding to cows that I don't know exist, or my cows here. He's bugling, this other bull's bugling, and they're kind of competing for the cows that are around. And so when a bull might be off in the distance making those lighter bugles, he's not doing a direct challenge to that bull. He might even just be saying, where are the cows, and trying to figure out, hey, maybe there's some free cows around here that I can get, or maybe you know, I won't have to expend energy in a confrontation, but then eventually works up to that group of elk and says, now I've got to make a challenge, because there's no way that I'm going to take this herd or show these cows that I'm the dominant bull if I don't step it up. And that's one reason why, you know, being timid and bugling, if you're trying to kill a mature herd bull, often doesn't happen, because he doesn't see it as a threat or a challenge, because he doesn't think that those cows will actually go, or that bull doesn't actually have the ability to steal his cows.
Very cool.
Yeah, go for it. And if you want to ask from your seat, just you can just yell it out, and I can repeat the question if you'd like. What do I think about bighorn sheep? What do I think about bugling sheep? Like pictures? Oh, I think she's talking about like where. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, gotcha. Like a picture, like a hunter photo of like the sheep with its nose in the air.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You see them around. I don't know if it's the best way to show off the curl of a ram, but it seems to be popular. But also, when you hold the sheep, sometimes the weight of their horns, it's an easy way to hold them. But it seems to be a way that people take photos of bighorn sheep. So, I don't know.
What would be your recommendation for like a new hunter for a first hunt, whether it's a kid or an adult that's just getting into it?
A recommendation for a new hunter or first hunt. I think the way that I started hunting was small game animals, birds, rabbits, things like that. Small game's a really good way to get familiar with a firearm, to be walking around, to kind of learn some of the basics of hunting, kind of, you know, learning some of the mechanics of getting out there, and also kind of like an introduction that can be a day trip, but also fairly successful in a short amount of time. Whereas, you know, if you get into big game hunting or elk hunting, it might take you a lot longer to find that first success or to get comfortable with the entire thing. So small game hunting is a really good way to kind of build up skills that go into other types of hunting. And I think it's extremely accessible. There's a lot of opportunities for small game hunting out there. And I think it's just a easier way to kind of get into it, because it's also something that you don't need a special tag for. You can generally just buy the license and go. It fits into a schedule. You can do it in a half a day. You can do it in a full day. but it gets you in the field and gets you kind of started on that path of understanding what you're doing out there, and also kind of picking up some skills, especially if you're with somebody that knows, and talking about the things that you might encounter on a big game hunt, looking at other animals, kind of building the skill set while still being out in the field and getting an experience hunting. My wife, when she got into hunting, we started with grouse, and it was actually, as a professional big game guide, the hardest hunt I ever guided was trying to get her first grouse, because there was no grouse that year. And but along the way, I was showing her things. We were talking about things, practicing using the firearm, practicing, being ready, and then having that bit of success that was exciting, and also saying like, okay, I can handle this, I can do this, and then eventually led into big game. And then before she got into bow hunting, the first thing she started bow hunting again was grouse. She would go out by herself even and try to get a grouse with her bow. And I think that was a really good building block for when a deer stepped out. It wasn't the first time she'd even drawn back on a bow, or moved it full draw, or practiced drawing out of sight and got a lot of the mechanics out of the way on something that you might get multiple opportunities in a day. So.
That is a great question. Kind of reminds me of, outdoor television has done a tremendous thing for the hunting community. It's brought a platform of, education and adventure and that, but there is a downside to it, as you probably know, is you watch these shows and people are just successful after successful after successful, and for our young people out there, that's not reality. There's a lot that goes into that, and just wonder what your thoughts were about, speaking to young people watching outdoor television, saying, well, for every successful hunt or stalk or whatever, there's, hundreds of other fails that just don't make television.
Yeah, I think most people that have hunted long enough know that there's a lot more, I guess if you want to call it unsuccessful days and successful days, but as a lifelong hunter, we know that it's all those days in between that make the hunt. It's that you spend a week maybe in the backcountry looking for elk, and that one split second where a bull walks out and you shoot it is what you've been striving for the whole time. But the whole hunt was the stuff that leading up to that, the experiences that you had and the things that you learned. And so that's kind of the steps of hunting that I think maybe aren't shown so easily, but definitely are the things that are encountered by everyone. It's what makes hunting enjoyable for me, is all those days out there in the pursuit. It's the pursuit that we enjoy. And so, we're just getting into it. It is nice to find that success, but it's also nice to kind of understand that there's going to be a process. You might be unsuccessful, but it doesn't mean that you're unsuccessful, really. It's you're getting out there, you're hunting, you're doing it, and you're learning along the way. And it's just good to understand that those things are part of this whole thing that we love, which is hunting.
Yep, very well.
So out of all your hunts, you can only pick one, what would be the one that comes to your mind as, say, a favorite?
Yes, what would be my favorite hunt of all the hunts that I've done? That's a very difficult question, because pretty much the next hunt is my favorite, the one I get to look forward to next. In the past, I think there's a couple deer hunts that come to mind, specifically in Montana, a special draw tag that I had. But I think one of my favorite hunts was probably last year, getting to bow hunt with my wife. She was pregnant at the time. And, there's a lot of hunts. I've been on a lot of amazing hunts for myself, but it was really cool to see her dive into bow hunting. And it wasn't just like we went out for the weekend. She was pretty determined. She was, I think, 4 months pregnant. And she hunted close to 20 days, and we hunted every day, including Christmas Day. And she was really wanted to get a deer and really put the work in. And it was just cool to see her actually be successful, but also kind of go through that process of the highs and lows of bow hunting, and to be there with her at the same time. So that was really enjoyable for me. Yeah, go ahead.
If you're in a no good area, like somewhere local, how long do you stay there without seeing game before you try to back up and go back
He asked if you're in an area and it's a known good area, but how long do you stay before, like, without seeing game? So I think there's a lot of different hunting styles. My hunting style, I guess I would say I have more happy feet than anything. If I'm in an area that I know should be good and I'm not seeing what I think I should be seeing, then I generally move on fairly quickly. Now, it depends on a couple factors. The amount of time that I spend in one particular spot depends on one, like how huntable that particular spot is, and that generally means how open it is and how glassable it is. If I'm in a canyon that's super timbered, I'm seeing a lot of sign and I have previous knowledge that it's a good area, then I'm really going to commit and spend more time in there, especially because it might be more of a needle in a haystack approach to go somewhere else that I don't know, and I'll know that the animals could be there, but I'm not seeing it. I kind of base my timing in an area on my effectiveness of hunting it. So if I feel like I've sat down, I've covered the area, I feel like I'm maybe not seeing the amount of sign that I should be seeing, and I'm not seeing what I'm looking for, then I'm gonna move on and kind of really like hit as many spots as I can until I start seeing what I'm looking for. And oftentimes I found that, you know, when you think about like a large area, 90% of the animals are in just 10% of the country. And it can change over the years and over the course of maybe different weather patterns, different types of rainfall that year. I mean, things constantly change. So what I like to do is when I am in an area and then I do find something that I'm looking for, I like to kind of pay attention to why do I think these animals are in this particular area? If, you know, and kind of really paying attention to why is it that, you know, this area was good last year, but maybe I'm not seeing what I did last year. So I'm going to move around because the seasonality of, you know, the rainfall that spring, the current temperatures, the moon phase, a lot of different things play factors into where animals will be. So I do like to stay mobile and try to figure out where they are right then when I'm in the field, and not just kind of commit to a certain spot and really beat my head against a rock saying, oh, there should be animals here, but I'm not finding them, when I know that I could maybe move and cover more country and get into a place where I'm gonna, you know, find more animals, or at least like be more successful in that aspect, if that makes sense. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think is the most like overlooked skill involved in hunting?
He asked what the most overlooked skill in hunting is. I think that the most overlooked skill in hunting would have to be that adaptability. You know, it's, well, there's actually two things I think are fairly overlooked skills. One is being able to adapt, but adapt your tactics based on what's going on in the field while you're there. That's big, and just like through observation, understanding why, like giving that critical thinking of why is something doing what it's doing. One year one thing that got me kind of thinking in this way is I was hunting mule deer. I'd seen, you know, plenty of deer, but for some reason I stopped and I looked, and I look in this one little pocket and there's 4 or 5 big bucks. And I'm like, okay, what are they doing? I just sit there and watch those deer, and it was September in Montana, and I'm like, yeah, they're getting up on their hind legs, like what are they eating? And I'm looking, and they were like grabbing elderberries off into this dry area, and there happened to be a patch of elderberries, and there's multiple large deer in here. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So I pull out my map and I'm like, okay, what's this area got that maybe a little bit more water and at this elevation? And I go and find other places that have those elderberries, and I was seeing mature deer. Now, not always, like just for some reason that week, maybe whatever happened pre-season, maybe there's something in those elderberries that they wanted that nutrition while they're growing out that week in September, I don't know. But it led me to deer in other places. So just in that weird moment of saying, like, I should be more observant of what's going on while I'm out there, and then try to replicate that other places. That is a really good skill to have. Then the next probably most overlooked skill is walking with your head up. As a guide and outfitter, you see people walking. I run into people hunting all the time. You know, I'll be walking up a trail and they're walking down, and they clearly haven't seen anything, and I will walk 300-400 yards past them and spot some elk over on the ridge here or whatever. It's just being alert and walking with your head up makes a big difference. And then the next, I guess I'm going to add a bonus overlook skill, you've got binoculars, use them. A lot of people trust their eyes, like their natural eyesight too much. I know, like, myself and some of my guides, we always joke, like, we'll see someone and they've got their binoculars in their backpack where they've got, you know, their optics on their chest, and they never put them to their face. And it's like, you cannot glass animals through osmosis of your bino pack just on the front. You have to put it to your face. And the more you glass, the more you use the tools that you have available to you, the more successful you're going to be. So I think that those would probably be the most overlooked skills of identifying what's in your area while you're there and replicating it, paying attention, walking with your head up, which is so easy to do, and then using the optics that you have. Yes?
What portion of the mule deer rut do you like to hunt? Early, peak, late?
He asked what portion of the mule deer hunt I like to hunt, or sorry, what portion of the mule deer rut I like to hunt. I personally like to hunt early. I like to catch a deer in that moving phase. I do not like hunting late when they're in that lockdown phase. So the trouble with when they're cruising is the fact that it can be hard to relocate deer, but you can also, you know, you see more deer, and I find that you can actually find deer that you may have not caught in other places. But I like to use a technique of being able to cover a lot of country at one point, so finding good glassing vantages, because you end up seeing more deer cruising and traveling, and I think I've found more large deer that way. On the flip side, you know, when it's peak rut and they've got their pockets of does, it's a little bit more it's a little bit easier to get in. And so I think the best time to find large deer is when they're cruising. The best time to kill large deer during the rut is when they are competing for pockets of does, because you can continue to check doe pockets, and once they get into where those does are, they might be there long enough for you to move in and make a successful stalk. So early to like mid-rut. As it gets into later rut, you start seeing fewer and fewer deer, because what they'll do is they'll pull some of those does away and they kind of lock down into smaller pockets. So that time of year, instead of a long glassing approach, I tend to find more deer by you know, moving around a lot more. So it kind of adjusts the tactic based on the rut. So early rut, I find those locations where I'm set up looking over a large area, because I can see more animals moving, and I'm going to have you know, that more opportunity to catch something that might be in the timber, pop out in the open. And then later on, as they start to lock down in little pockets, you have to do a little bit more footwork, kind of pick in and check more areas at once. And then in the middle, you know, you can do a combination of finding those pockets of does and focusing on where those does are at. So it's a little bit of different tactics for different times of year, and depends on how you like to hunt.
Off subject, what are your top 3 pieces of advice for a mountain goat hunt?
For top 3 pieces of advice for a mountain goat hunt? Yeah. I would say the first one, if you've got a mountain goat tag, is be familiar with the difference of identifying a billy and a nanny. It's, for new mountain goat hunters, it's the most difficult thing, but you know, you can figure it out pretty quick just by watching a lot of videos and observing the animals. I would say the second thing of advice is be in good physical shape. I think mountain goat hunting is probably the most fit, or any kind of goat hunting, most often is the most physical hunt you can go on, because they do live in extremely rough terrain, and they use the shelter of those cliffs to survive. And then the third thing would be, you know, finding a spot where when you shoot them, you can recover them. Some of my scariest experiences have been trying to recover animals that we thought could get to the bottom and couldn't, or got stuck on a cliff halfway. My brother had to rock climb up to retrieve one goat once, and you know, it's a scary situation. I've had to do it multiple times on chamois and some other species, and you know, just like kind of thinking like finding goats is not hard, identifying goats is not hard. Finding a goat where you can recover a goat is kind of the name of the game and the challenge. Unfortunately, I shot a goat in a good spot, and then it ran and jumped off a cliff, which was not awesome. And we did recover it, but it was pretty damaged at the end, and that's a fairly common occurrence with goats. So even when you think you've got it all right, they can go do something crazy. Yes.
For a lot of us, the hardest part is getting drawn.
Yeah.
And I've put in for many hunts for many years. And I have friends who have used application assistance services like Cabela's. Do you feel there's value in that?
So he says the hardest part about hunts often is getting drawn, and then he applies in a lot of places, and then knows people that use application services. I mean, yes and no. It depends on your time and commitment to what you're looking for. And yeah, I mean, hiring an application service is great if you want someone to do the application for you and make sure you get in. It depends on what your goals are, because sometimes, and as long as they understand, hey, I'm looking for only a trophy hunt or the hardest to draw tag, or maybe, hey, I'm just looking for a good opportunity. I think sometimes when you do a service, maybe they aren't tailoring it specifically to you. I just don't, have a lot of experience with them. But I mean, it can't be a bad thing. But also, I think when you do your own applications and do your own research, you end up finding things that maybe someone else is missing and is specifically tailored toward you. So I've got a lot of points in a lot of places. I started the application game very young. I think I started applying out of state before before there was a lot of these publications that talked about it, and you had to do a lot of legwork. You had to do a lot of reading of the regulations, looking through things, like talking to people on the ground and trying to figure it out. Now there's ways that you can do that fairly easily. I personally, when I do my applications, I use the Go Hunt Insider. It's a subscription, but it allows me to kind of filter things the way that I'm looking for. And by doing that, I've found a lot more hunts and found myself having more tags, because I'm looking for things that are specific to the way that I like to hunt and not maybe something necessarily someone else is looking for. And I don't get bogged down in the what's everyone else doing, because you end up chasing tags that become really popular and really hard to obtain. And I think that the best thing is to have a tag in your pocket. I shot the biggest bull in my life this year, a 390 7x7, in an area that I don't think a single magazine would ever recommend. But the way that I found it was, well, I used to guide there, and I wanted to hunt there kind of out of nostalgia, or guide in an area very close by. But also kind of looking at it of like, okay, maybe you're just looking at different factors. I was thinking, okay, where's an area that maybe has good success, but like is in this particular hunt, thinking, where's an area where it's got a high success and probably has, like not big bulls, but easier to kill elk, where most people are probably encountering them near roads. And then does it have an area that I can hike into that probably no one else is hunting? So an area that's maybe not known for trophy animals, easy to get a tag, but has enough opportunity where people don't have to hunt real hard to encounter elk. Maybe it's an either sex tag where it's like, hey, they might shoot a cow, they might shoot a bull. And then are people really getting after it in this particular area and going into the back, like into pockets that are far hikes, hard to hunt areas, and then going into that area and finding no other hunters and a large population of bulls that have age class and good genetics. So, kind of being able to match what I'm looking for with the amount of points that I have and my own research, like finding it myself, I've found that I pick up a lot more tags that way. And even with general over-the-counter tags, being able to research it myself using that application, so I don't have to go. When I first started using that, it kind of blew me away, because I was talking to one of the guys that works there, and he was showing me like a run through, and he's like, gave me these factors, filtered it out, and it came up with the 3 units that I hunt based on the things that I told him. And I used to have my own spreadsheets, and like I would pull all the data myself, and then I'd look through it and I'd build and I was like, well, that was a lot easier than it took me a month to figure out, and I thought I had the secret spot for the way that I like to hunt, and have hunted those areas successfully for quite a while now. But I think that just being able to do your own research, whether it's using that or just, going on the state website and kind of picking areas and having a tag. If you've got a tag in your pocket, you have 100% better chance than if you're sitting at home without a tag. So, I wouldn't get so wrapped up in chasing chasing the hot spot right now, as opposed to trying to think about what might be the hot spot in the future, or what's good for you and meets your goals. That was like kind of a long-winded response, but application season's right now, and it's a huge part of Western hunting, and playing that tag draw game, and being good at that tag draw game, or being able to pick up tags, makes a big difference when it comes to actually hunting and being out in the field.
That's really good advice. I think a lot of people are chasing that holy grail hunt, you know, how many points and max points and all that type of stuff. But if you do burrow in a little bit, there's a lot of great hunts and great opportunities that get you out there hunting instead of waiting 5, 6, 7 years, a lifetime to draw one tag. You know, none of us are getting any younger, and so my approach is similar to yours. You know, what's going to get me hunting this year? And it doesn't always have to be that max point unit or that max point hunt. And we had the guys from Hunt and Fool up here a couple days ago, and they were echoing that same thing. Just don't get your head down in, well, I got to hunt Arizona, you know, Unit 7, and I might draw that in 30 years. Get hunting today, and there's opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better to hunt one spot 3 times than 3 spots once. If you can find somewhere that you can hunt, you know, and obtain a tag multiple times, the amount of information you gain on the ground in that particular unit is so valuable the next time you go, that you're going to be more successful over the course of those 3 hunts by, you know, finding something that you can do multiple years in a row. I found a lot of success doing that, and I think that that's a really, you know, obviously it's fun to go check out new areas, so it just depends what you're looking for. But if you're just looking to maximize your time in the field, I like to look for things that are easily obtainable in a way that I might be able to replicate it, maybe not every year, but every few years, and have that tag multiple times. I find you'll find a lot of success that way, because every year you learn something new about that particular place.
Cool.
Yes.
As a client to a guide, what's the best question?
He said, as a guide, what's the best question from a client I've ever been asked?
You ever see any deer here?
Yeah. Let's see. I got to think about that. I've never been asked that question, so.
Or what would be a good question to ask?
Oh, like as a potential, like as somebody potentially hunting with. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, he's asking like a good question to ask, like a potential client was a good question to ask a guide. I think one question that I'll tell you a bad question to ask. What's your success rate? You know, because then you say, if you ask me what my success rate is, I'll say, who's my hunter? You know? But I think that the best question to ask is like understanding what's a reasonable, like what would I need to do to like have good success on this hunt? You know, if you're saying like, hey, maybe this hunt isn't super physical. You know, if I was like, hey, it's a mule deer hunt in flat country. I'd say, you know, it's not super physical, but we might have some long shots. You know, understanding what you can do to prepare for the specific hunt you're going on is the best question to ask, because what you want to do is you want to be prepared in a way that helps you be successful, like helps you do what the guide needs you to do for that particular hunt. We're at the sheep show. I can already tell you the first thing that most of those guys would say is be in good physical shape. Because if you can keep up with your guide, you're going to kill a ram. You got to be able to hunt day in and day out, because sometimes it's a time thing. Now another hunt, it might just be like, hey, you got to be patient because we hunt these particular areas, and you just got to have that mental patience of saying it's going to be a low density area, but if maybe you're on a spring brown bear hunt, I would say, man, you got to have patience. You got to be able to sit there day in and day out and not see anything, but you got to go 12 days and know that in those 12 days, we'll probably see the bear that we're looking for. So understanding the kind of hunt you're going on, and then how you can kind of either physically or mentally prepare for it, and to give yourself the best opportunity for that trip. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. He asked, how does the moon phase affect my hunting techniques. So I think in the past, people talk about the moon in a way that like the moon controls the animals. And I've hunted, well, as a guide and outfitter, you hunt every week of the season, whether it's a full moon, whether it's good weather, whatever. And I do not believe that the moon itself is what changes the animal behavior. Like just having the moon out, it's not like the animals or the ocean and it's controlling the tide. What the moon does though is it projects light at night. And I believe that the light at night gives those animals an option to do something else that they might normally do, depending on the weather and other factors during that hunt. So, you go, okay, hunting during a full moon during the elk rut. Well, that oftentimes might kick off the rut, because what's happening is at night the temperatures are dropping if the week's hot, and then they have more light to be able to rut around and do things that they would do during the daytime because they can see better and they're more able to protect themselves against predators. If it's no moon, they're more likely to be bedded down and using their ears and nose to protect themselves against predators. So a full moon on a clear night, I would say animals are going to be more nocturnal, and so that's going to affect the tactics and the things that I would do during the day. Now, on the flip side, if it's a full moon and it's cold weather and completely cloudy and it's not projecting as much light, then I would say it would affect the animals differently. So I look at the moon as it can be a factor of, especially when you're talking about spotting animals, it can change the times of day that those animals might move. And it depends on when that light comes out. So sometimes it's a full moon. I like to look at when that moon rises and when it's setting. So sometimes you'll go from evening time into that full moon and then it's dark. So I know that oftentimes they might feed and then they might be more active in the morning or be coming out in the evening, depending on when that light is and how active those animals are. And there are a few hunts where I actually, a few hunts where I say, the moon affects it more. Spring bear hunting, I feel like when it's a full moon, it makes it a lot more difficult because you've got a finite amount of time to spot animals. But when it's a full moon, you end up seeing more bears in the middle of the day than in those mornings and evenings. And then, when it comes to like deer and elk, I would say I don't necessarily try to avoid the weeks that there's a full moon, because it just kind of depends on weather and then the other factors, like I say, of how that light is affecting the animals. It might not necessarily make them move more, but they are out in the open more when they aren't feeding at night. Yes.
Sort of following on to the obtainable tags, I wanted to see what your thoughts were on the Montana Unlimited units and how you would hunt that. I'm from this area, so obviously I couldn't go up there and scout a lot like if I live up in Montana. Like, how you would approach something like that?
Yep, so he asked the question about how I would approach a Montana Unlimited tag, especially if you're from an area where you can't really go scout a lot. The cool thing about that's one of those things, if you've got a tag in your pocket, you've got a chance. The reason that those unlimited tags are unlimited is because it's difficult and you got to find a 3/4 curl ram. And those areas, actually, one of the things that kind of keeps those sheep safe is the fact that it's timbered country, which is very difficult to hunt sheep when there's a low population of anything and a lot of cover. A few things that I've noticed in some of the areas that we hunt that are very similar to the unlimited areas is finding sheep travel areas in the timber. And I do that by a lot of times looking at, obviously historic routes of migration and places that they move, but also looking at the topography of the area. One thing, sheep and elk have a few things in common, but they do like to travel, like sheep that live in the timber, I found, do like to travel certain ridges. So when I'm in those areas, I look at the topography and say, where are these ridges from that kind of safety zone where, maybe this is a basin that sheep live, but you aren't seeing them in there because they're successfully timbered up. There's enough feed in the timber. When they go out in the open, maybe they're, being harvested or whatever. So they're kind of like timber rat sheep, and they're the hardest sheep to hunt, but you can kind of, look for sign and other things in those topography areas that they end up traveling. So I would say, like, through travel corridors, looking for those timbered ridges that have, good access to safety, which would be, maybe it's a timbered ridge where they could, if they got chased by wolves or something, they could easily access cliffs or other kinds of safety features. So really like using maps to kind of figure out what do sheep need. Well, they need safety, they need places to go, and they need that food and water. So sheep do like to feed on grass, so you're gonna have to say somewhere where you've got that grass, you've got that timber cover where that's probably where they're hiding out from hunters, and then also other escape routes from predators, and then figuring out, okay, is there sign in there? And it's a lot of like walking around, boot work kind of stuff. And it can be very difficult and very frustrating, but it can also be successful. And then also, obviously, glassing those typical sheep habitats, because you never know when they're gonna pop out, what day they're gonna pop out. Being patient, that's where, someone talked about moving around, but in that, I kind of base my move and weight, or like how hard I hunt a certain area based on how well I think I can effectively cover it. If you're looking at an area and it's good sheep habitat in an area where there will be sheep, and you look at it and you go, well, I can see 11% of this. It means there's probably sheep in the 90% I can't see, so I'm gonna have to be patient and really watch that 10% diligently, and it might take multiple days of not seeing anything, but then all of a sudden sheep pop out. That was very similar scenario to when I hunted stone sheep, is like that kind of country, very similar area to Montana unlimited areas, where it's, you might be in one canyon, you're gonna spend a little bit more time here, and you think you've seen everything, and then all of a sudden a sheep pops out and you go, yeah, I'm not seeing everything because there's a lot of cover. So adding in that factor of patience is going to be big. Doing your scouting and saying this is a good area, and then kind of just committing to that area and really being patient in it. Yes.
Just to kind of add on to that, if you were looking to hunt out of state as a non-resident somewhere, do you think it's better to go ahead and put in for those limited tag areas, or like any bull areas in Utah, or wait for like a limited draw, knowing that you're going to take longer to tag?
That's a great question. So you asked, if you're going to go out of state, is it better to kind of go into maybe a general unit, or is it better to wait for the draw? And I think it's good to kind of play a game of both. What I like to do is I like to look at my options and say, where can I maybe be hunting, but also kind of double up on a possible application of getting lucky. Because on a draw area, you are going to have, more often than not, a hunt where you find more animals, or have more encounters, or have like maybe a higher quality hunt. Now, that's not to say that you can't have those big animals in those easier to draw areas or unlimited areas or whatever. You've got a really good chance of hunting you got a really good chance of being successful if you're out in the field, right? But you also kind of don't want to discredit those potential opportunities to draw. So if you're going to limit the amount of places that you apply for, I like to, sometimes you got to invest a tag costs, or like just to apply. I like to find a place that, like, if you're just going to apply, like, hey, I'm going to do one state. I would pick one state where you have the option to apply, and then the option to later maybe pick up an over-the-counter tag if you've got sunk costs. So like a good example would be Colorado, where if you're thinking about elk hunting, you could say, okay, well, I got to buy the license to apply, and I got to buy the license to hunt. So you're already in that sunk cost of the tag. I would then try my luck in the draw, or start building points. So hey, on year 3, I can go into an area that might be a little bit better, but in the meantime, I could pick up an over-the-counter tag and get that experience in that area until I eventually draw my tag. You can either, if you're like, hey, I can't apply everywhere, but I can apply a few places, I like to take approach of picking 3 different states based on the type of draws that they have. I like to pick one random draw, which would be Idaho or New Mexico. So everybody's on the same playing field, and you can get lucky. You can draw some really good tags, and you're in the same kind of boat as everybody every year. And then I would say pick one preference point state where you can kind of build up points and kind of guarantee a tag, but don't set your sights on that one that's like 7 points right now, because it's probably going to be 14 points by the time you get 7 points. Pick somewhere that's 2 or 3 points where people are burning through, and there's fewer hunters and maybe a little bit more opportunity. And then I would, pick one bonus point state where just that's the long game of, hey, I could draw it at any year, but the more I apply, the better my chances are. And then of those 3 places, make sure one area has potential over-the-counter opportunities, or like you say, maybe an unlimited permit or something like that, where you're already buying your license and you can kind of say, hey, I'm going to commit to hunting this area if I don't draw something else. It's the best bang for your buck, and probably in the long run the most successful if you, trying to limit the amount of places you apply, because it does get expensive to apply everywhere, and you start to feel like you're chasing kind of something that you can never get sometimes. Yes. She asked like what a day out guiding might look like, and it just depends on the type of hunt. So where we're at, we do a lot of like pretty much hiking in every day. So we'll go to an area. We'll start off hiking before sunup, get into a spot where we'll be looking, glassing, generally out from sunup till dark. So we kind of start hiking in the morning, have our hunt plan or where we're going to start looking, try to locate whatever we're hunting. And then, if it doesn't work out or we don't see anything, continuing moving, checking different spots. A lot of it depends on the type of hunt, but a lot of looking, a lot of glassing, a lot of hiking, and then hiking back out at night. Now, if it's a backcountry type hunt, every day is a little bit different. You might be packing in with a backpack tent, like a backcountry sheep hunt. You've got everything on you. Your first day in is probably going to be a long slog to get to where you want to start hunting. And then maybe you'll wake up that morning, look in that area, load up your tent and sleeping bag and everything, and then start hiking to the next spot with all your gear because you're going to check another basin. So every day is a little bit different. It depends on where you're hunting, what you're hunting, but I would say for the most part, it's kind of I guess it really just depends on what kind of hunt it is. But yeah, generally an all day kind of before sunup, after dark kind of thing. Yes?
Have you noticed a lot of change in behavior and how that
He asked about a notice and change of behavior and habitat since the reintroduction of wolves. So I have an interesting kind of, like an interesting interaction with wolves. The area that I hunt and guided a lot, there were no wolves when I started hunting there. I'll never forget the first time I saw a wolf. I was actually, I think it was, I can't remember the exact year, but I was moving in on this herd of elk, and I come around the corner, and here's a wolf standing there staring at me at 20 yards. And I was like, didn't know those were here, And that was the first of many that I ended up seeing. Our area ended up, the wolf population really exploded, and I think it was kind of because, as Keith had mentioned earlier, there was a large fire and the elk population exploded. And as that elk population exploded, that wolf population exploded, and it got a lot of bad publicity for a long time of saying it's been decimated by wolves. But I also I like hunting it all the time. We had the same amount of success and this ran into more elk than I did in other areas, so I think it was a higher population, and then that population was reduced by wolves. Now when it comes to the behavior of the animals in that area, I don't necessarily know that, and there will probably be a lot of people who will vehemently disagree with me, but for elk to exist, they have to do elk things, right? And whether there's human predators hunting them or wolves hunting them, elk still have to rut. There's been many times that I've been in on bugling elk with wolves howling less than 500 yards away. And those elk are still doing elk things. They're still breeding, they're still doing what elk do. So just like anything though, if an animal is being hunted and pressured, it's gonna act like it's being hunted and pressured. So it depends on, like a lot of factors of when they were recently hunted, but here I am in there hunting those elk, and there's wolves howling, and those elk aren't really paying attention to that. And I've encountered that multiple times. So I think that, you know, you have to kind of look at it as we can't blame all of our hunting success and failures on predators, but we can blame populations on predators in many places. So, you know, if you aren't seeing as many animals, you know, that could be directly tied to an increase in predator population. But I also think that sometimes we have to adjust our tactics because maybe those predators will move animals out of a certain area, but those elk are still going to be doing elk things somewhere else. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of cease to exist. So they still will bugle. They still will be responsive to calls. They still have to breed, and they only know how to breed in certain ways. So it does affect the populations, but I don't necessarily know if it always affects kind of the way that you would hunt them or interact with them. It just might change the places that you're looking for them, if that makes sense. Like it might displace a herd of elk from this canyon to the next canyon. So I've seen that happen a lot where people go, there's no more elk here because the wolves have moved in, but it's not that the elk are like unhuntable. It's just that you might have to adjust your tactics a little bit. I guess. So yes, it does affect it, but I think sometimes a lot of the effects are blamed unnecessarily, where it's just like you might have to do, like they just aren't where you saw them last year in many ways.
That certainly was the early book on the wolf as we watched the population grow. People were going back to their historic places and saying, well, there's no elk here anymore, so the wolves must have ate them all. They do have an impact certainly on the population, but it did push elk into other areas at different times. So as time has kind of marched on, those guys that weren't having success, they've adapted and now they're back into elk again. So you're not really hearing that the wolves have ate everything again.
Yeah, and another thing to mention to that is, you know, with anything, you know, we've got this model of conservation where we are managing ungulate species, but then like some people expect the predator populations to go unchecked, and it just doesn't balance out. You know, everything needs to be balanced. So, you know, by hunting predators and with the increase of hunting on wolves and other things, though, you know, I think everything's kind of started to stable out a lot better, and you see a little bit less of that, less of those problems that were originally when they moved into an area, and it was like the elk didn't really know what was going on, so they kind of had to adapt to more hunting pressure when they were used to less hunting pressure. And then over the years, I think some of that's kind of mellowed out. One of the interesting things that they found in that Bitterroot study was, you know, they collared a bunch of elk, they collared a bunch of wolves, and they were, you know, seeing, you know, how many elk are being killed by wolves. And what they found out, that more elk were being killed by mountain lions than wolves. But what was happening is the mountain lion would kill the elk, then the wolves would come in and flush the elk, or the mountain lion off the elk, and then the mountain lion would just go and kill another elk. And so everybody's blaming the wolves, and I'm over here like, the lions are the problem in this particular instance. And I've actually witnessed that lion killing, lions getting chased off a kill from wolves. So in that particular area, that was the big thing. So it's just, you know, diving in and understanding that, but also, you know, not being afraid to manage those predator populations, because everything needs to be managed depending on the area. Oh, in the back.
Yeah, I don't know if you talked about this at all, but there's a ton of vendors out here. Everybody's got their favorite. Mine's better than yours, and so on. You still have to talk about different calibers and what might be your one that you would specifically have a client or something for different species.
Yep.
General idea.
Yeah, he asked about specific rifle calibers. You know, everybody's got their own opinion. My personal opinion on rifle calibers, I am a big fan of the 300 short mag. I like 30 caliber because it's something that you can you can hunt up anything large, and you can hunt things that are smaller as well. I like the 300 short mag because I like mountain hunting, and I like the short action. It's you know, you shave a little bit of weight off by having a shorter action. You've got a shorter bolt throw, so when you're set up on the mountain, you're generally hunting in shooting in like a laid down packed position. You can reload and kind of keep your target acquisition without having to move your head off the rifle. It's a quick bolt throw. and it's a lighter action, lighter rifle, but you still have performance for good long range shooting if you need it. You've got you can load up heavier bullets that are affected by less wind drift. I think it's a really good caliber, and that's the one that I always promote. Now, with any rifle, it doesn't matter what you're shooting, I think you really need to pay attention to the type of ammunition you're using, specifically the bullet that you're using. There are a lot of different bullets out there. There's a lot of bullets that are made for long range, there's a lot of bullets that are made for targets, and there's a lot that are made for hunting. When it comes to like lethal kills, obviously like bonded bullets seem to be the best, but you know, a lot of things have moved away from that and gone to more long range bullets that might not necessarily be as effective for hunting. So you could maybe use a certain caliber, a lighter caliber, with a better hunting bullet. So I also like to match the bullet to the caliber. If I'm hunting with a lighter caliber, I like a more, I would say, like more sturdy bullet that's better at knocking animals down, a little bit more weight retention, less frangible. You know, so I have like more success of when whatever I shoot at goes down, as opposed to using a lighter caliber with maybe it's a good BC bullet, but it's not really good for knockdown power or like, you know, hunting lethality. So that's a good thing to think about. You know, I have, you know, 6.5 is a popular round now. It's great for mid-sized game. I've originally was like, I'm not a big fan of the 6.5, and then I found some bullets that I started shooting with it and have had really good success with elk. Like, you know, at first I thought it was too light for elk, and I've taken 4 or 5 elk with it. Recently, it ranges from, you know, like up to 500 yards and just one shot kill. So it just kind of matching that, but my personal preference on my favorite rifle caliber is a 300 sharp mag. Yep. Tips for hunting chukar without a dog? Yeah, that's actually the way that I hunt them the most. I treat it like kind of like a little bit of a spot and stock hunt, but finding the terrain that they like, obviously the rocky, cliffy stuff, and approaching from the top. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get into that terrain where I know that, like, you know, find those cliffs and those cliff bands that they'll probably be roosting in, you know, mid-morning or whatever, and also kind of following the areas where they're going to be feeding. So right now, the edge of the snow line where there's going to be that green up, you know, going to those places where they're most likely to go. Then say you spook them up, watch where they go, and then sneak in quietly to try not to get them to jump too soon by doing that kind of hidden sneak approach. We were just hunting them a few days ago, and you know, they would get into those cliffs, and if you go from the bottom, it'd be loud and whatever. So just kind of taking that big game stalking approach to the places where they're kind of holed up at seems to be pretty good. And then the other thing is, if you don't have a dog, when you knock one down, just watch that one bird, because the bird in hand is better than 2 in the bush is very, very true. You know, that's the nice thing about when you've got your dog, you recover you can shoot multiple birds and often recover them all. So. Yeah, he asked quantifying the amount of tags, like the amount of applying I've done over the years to the amount of tags that I've drawn. I apply in pretty much every western state, plus some other states, you know, that have some, like eastern states that have moose and other things. But I would say I've drawn very few limited entry tags, but also I would say like my sample size is skewed, because I have to pick hunts that are around a guiding season. So like I don't even know how many points in Colorado, but that Colorado deer and elk season has always been the same weeks that I'm guiding in Montana. So in those places, I'm just building points. Now in other places, you know, I have drawn few tags. I would say like there are places where I'm just looking for that very best tag, and I'm willing to like put in the time to get that best tag. But I would say, like, for the most part, most of my hunting that I do throughout the year would be, or over my lifetime, 90% is in probably what would be considered a general type unit. Maybe not over-the-counter tag, but an easier to draw tag, or something that doesn't take a lot of points. Because I've noticed that, you know, as time goes on, it is very difficult to draw a lot of tags. You have to get extremely lucky. In my home state, I've drawn, you know, a considerable amount of tags, but I think, you know, that's how it works is, you know, where you live, you draw more tags, and then for those very limited non-resident tags, it can be a slog, and that's why I think, you know, you're almost better off planning those over-the-counter or tags that you can obtain more often, like actually building that into your plan more than planning on drawing a really hard to draw tag, because statistically, many of the tags that you apply for, you won't draw in your lifetime. So you're kind of just playing that gambling game while having other hunts planned that you know you can go to. If you want to hunt, you have to look at those tags that you can easily obtain. And they're becoming fewer and far between recently, as states are changing. A lot of over-the-counter tags are going away, which is kind of a bummer. The state of, you know, being able to go out and hunt is changing. You know, there's a lot of factors probably for that, and I don't know, the pandemic plays a big factor in that, but you know, I think when you're looking at your kind of like building out, hey, I want to go elk hunting, I want to do this, I want to do that, really building your solid plan on the things that you know you can obtain, because otherwise you're going to be waiting a very long time for tags that you might not ever draw. That. Yep.
Do you have any, I don't know if you've done it, but do you have any pro tips of hunting Roosevelt elk in the rainforest?
Pro tips hunting Roosevelt elk in the rainforest. Yeah, I've hunted Roosevelts a few times. You know, I think that anytime you're hunting cover, well, it depends what are you talking like, because I would, if it was me and someone says, hey, I live in a rainforest, a really heavily timbered area, how do I hunt elk? I'm going to say, figure out how to hunt during the rut, because they're more vocal. It's the best time of year to chase them. You know, even if you aren't a bow hunter, I would say go get a bow and figure it out. You know what I mean? Because and there's two reasons to that. What you're going to learn when they're being vocal is like, when I actually, my elk hunting strategy, I prefer to hunt thick cover because it's easier to draw bulls in, and I can hunt elk that normally are really hard to find. They're bulls that live in the timber. So if you aren't an archery hunter, you know, going out and scouting those times, but you're going to get the best, I would say, experience understanding where those elk live and their habits when they're telling you where they're at. When you bugle and they bugle back, it's like another way to find things that are you won't be able to glass up. So hunting during the rut is a really good way to understand where those elk are, and then the amount of things you're going to learn while hunting them during the rut can play into the rifle season. You're going to find that sign, you're going to find those trails, you're going to find stuff that you do not find when you're just scouting. When you have a tag in your pocket and a bow in your hand or something in your hand, and you're actually in pursuit, you're hunting harder, you're actually getting in there and understanding what those elk are doing, and you're going to find those things like wallows, you're going to find those travel corridors, and then you can use all that knowledge in a hunt later in the season. So if you aren't a bow hunter, maybe make friends with a bow hunter and go out and hunt with them during that time of year, because what you learn in that timber during that time of year is going to be extremely valuable when it comes rifle season and other seasons. Now, you know, obviously things do change a little bit when they pull away from the cows. They might go into a dark hole somewhere and recuperate during most rifle seasons after the archery season. But you're going to learn where those holes are and those pockets are, because you heard that they were like, hey, I'm over here, I'm an elk, I'm over here. That makes it a lot easier to find than just walking around through the jungle.
Yeah, our Roosevelt elk hunting, the game is really changing. I went to school in Corvallis, Oregon, and that was still when we had the logging heyday. With logging being shrunk back as much as it has, we're not seeing those clear cuts like we used to. And hunting the edge of the clear cuts was always money, whether it was rifle or bow. That cover now is growing. Those clear cuts, that logging activity is not as clearly defined and as widespread. So I would echo that. That's great advice. Stick to the rut, because it is growing back and growing back thick.
Yeah, and another kind of thing to think about too is like, if you're in an area that is like that that rainforest, real thick cover. Anytime I look at an area, and I say this a lot, but when I look at an area, whatever I'm hunting, I look for the thing that they need that's least available. Like, what's the most precious resource that elk need that's not necessarily everywhere? So in a rainforest type environment for Roosevelt elk, it is jungle. They have, like, think about the three, I mean, you talk about the three things animals need is food, water, and cover, right? So if it's a like temperate rainforest, it's jungle, they have cover. Cover is in no lack of supply, right? And there's probably water in every canyon because that's why there's so much grass. So what else do they need? Well, food, and grass is a primary food source for elk. They're grazers, they like that grass, much like cattle, deer get their nutrition from the nutrient part of browse, but grass is what attracts elk. So like Keith was saying, focusing in on, hey man, this is all cover, but here's one opening. Here's one meadow at the top. Here's a saddle that can get sun and has a little bit more feed. Maybe it's not fully open, but figuring out, like, using your satellite imagery, using your map layers to kind of identify that thing that's missing, and then start there. Like, I would always start by pinpointing those spots. If I'm looking at a map and I'm hunting something and I'm like, dude, it is all timber, but right here's a little opening. That could be a feeding area. It doesn't even have to be big, but just something that's a little bit different. That's where I'm going to start, and then I can kind of key in on the animals around that one, like narrowing it down. If I'm hunting elk in the desert, it's like, or the high desert, it's really open. You can glass a lot. So maybe where's that cover? Maybe where's that water? So I'm focusing on, like, narrowing, pinpointing down the thing that they need that's in least supply. In the back. Yeah, you asked about on those hard hunts or something, when you're, perseverance and just that keeping your head in the game, day 9, day 8, day 9, when things aren't going well. We've all been there. I mean, I can't just sit up here and say I've never, like, got sour in my mind too, like, it happens. And I think one of the things that, kind of keeps me going and is just like this little, it's almost like a mental trick of, like, you gotta be excited of the things that suck, right? Like, if you have an attitude of, like, man, I gotta climb up this mountain. Oh God, I'm so tired. I gotta climb up this mountain. But if you're like, you just talk yourself up of, like, this mountain is awesome, man. I bet you I'm the only person that gets to climb this mountain. How lucky am I to get to climb this mountain? I wonder if I can make it to the top of this mountain without stopping. Yeah, you know what, I can, this is a great mountain. Just, like, kind of tricking yourself in many ways of saying, dehydrated food, God, this is so much better than mama's cooking. Like, just those little tricks of telling yourself, because that's the story, right? My favorite hunting stories, when I'm sitting in hunting camp, I like to tell the stories of the things that went south. Because that's the story. And when you're out there, when you're living the things that went south, when you had that miss, you aren't thinking of it X amount of years down the road. You're thinking of it in the moment, and it sucks. But you start thinking of the things that suck, and you kind of, I always like you go where your mind goes. And if you start thinking something sucks, and you're like, one thing that I notice that I do and I really try not to do is, like, and I think everybody does this, is on a really hard hunt, when you aren't seeing anything and you go, there's nothing here. When you say there's nothing here, I'm not going to see anything, you know what happens? You treat it like there's nothing there. You stop hunting like there's when you are fresh on the hunt and it's like the world is my oyster and there can be anything around any bush. How hard are you glassing? How early are you getting up? How excited are you to get to that glassing knob and spend that little extra time? But when you're like, man, nothing's here, I'll just eat my lunch, this hunt sucks, I'm not going to see anything, you probably aren't, because you're setting yourself up for not hunting like you're expecting to find something. And so keeping that mental game of always expecting and never, like, it can happen at any time. One thing I say a lot is like, the difference between the worst hunt and the best hunt is a few seconds. I'm just looking for that few seconds, and I'll do anything to find that few seconds. And keeping your head in the game that way, because you do find more success when you have that mindset, because it causes you to hunt harder.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So a lot of us practice in benign. Okay, a lot of us practice in benign circumstances. And what are your tips for somebody coming west and mule deer health for both bow and gun? Something that they should do that they maybe not doing anymore?
Are you checking for just like the actual shooting portion?
Yeah, how do you prepare yourself to take that one shot?
Yep.
What are the differences between what happens on the mountain versus what happens when you kind of 3D shoot on a range?
Yeah. Yes. How do you kind of prepare for like that one shot when you might get one opportunity and you've got to make a good shot, but your practice is in the backyard, your practice is at a range. There's a few things that I like to do when it comes to practice. The first one is, practicing those situations that I'm going to encounter in the field. And most of the time, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and it's never perfect. I think like we get in the repetition of making, especially when it comes to bow hunting, like making that flat ground 30-yard even shot with your top pin, everything set up right. I try to practice with as many things going wrong as possible, half squatted, drawn back in the wind, in the rain, with my pin set at 50 and the target at 30, because that's the kind of shots that I always get. And what it does is it tricks your mind into like having encountered a scenario before you actually get in there, shooting at an angle, shooting at an uphill angle, taking those difficult shots. And then another thing, like I like to practice, like put my target out with some rocks behind it. It's like I hate losing arrows, I hate breaking arrows, but the pressure of breaking an arrow is very comparable to the pressure of making a good shot on an animal. I would say it's a lot less, but it's something to factor in and to think about. And then adding in finding those ways that you don't, finding those things that you're weak at and practicing those. Shooting. I mean, one thing I think that happens a lot when it comes to rifle hunting, guys go and they sight in their rifle on a bench, right? Well, your cheek weld on a bench is one thing. What's your cheek weld going to be when you're in the field? And how many times have you shot in that position of off shooting sticks? How many times have you shot in that position of off a pack? So I always, I'll get a rifle zeroed on a bench, but when it comes to really putting time behind my gun, it's always in infield situations. Even if you've only got 100-yard range, you need to be practicing those shots, like getting set up and getting in position fast, being familiar with your rifle. It doesn't, you don't even have to do that by firing around. It could be dry fire practice of just like throwing the gun up. I shoot, I would say I shoot, I wouldn't even know, 100,000 invisible rounds a year, I do more dry fire practice than anything, because I want everything to be right. I want that trigger. I don't need to, have a round go down range once I know my rifles are on. I know they're on. I know what they shoot at. Once I know that, it doesn't matter. But I do that all the time still. Practicing throwing the gun up, and was that where I wanted that rifle to break? I think for rifle shooting, that's probably the best way to practice. Yeah. How technical do I like my rangefinders for rifle? That's a good question. Man, I just recently started using one that this year that kind of does all the dope and everything for you. It's nice. Can't lie, man. It's a lot smarter than I am. But I think that it should also not. Here's one thing that I used to do when we would have clients show up to our camp is everyone would shoot their guns. And it was more along the lines of seeing how people shot. And I never would look at the target. I can generally tell where someone hits by watching the shooter, watching how they set the rifle, watching how they steady the rifle, watching how they react to the shot. And I can pretty much tell you whether they made a good shot or bad shot, and I don't even care where it hits on the paper. But another thing that I would do is, so we do that and see where, make sure everything's sighted and see how the person shoots, try to adjust maybe a little technique and form, and then we'd have some FAR targets, and if you want to shoot at those, whatever. And then oftentimes I would take someone else's gun, a gun that I've never shot, and I'd say, what caliber is it? What weight grain bullet? And I would grab that gun and I'll shoot it without any doping at 400, 500, 600 yards and hit the gongs every time. And it's just understanding like the drop of that bullet. And I don't know many of you, but like what your background is, but for me, when I was a kid, I don't know how many rounds of 22 I shot, and I would shoot at every range, right? From 50 yards open sight 22 to 300 yards on the hill, just shooting at everything. And what your brain can build that drop compensation, and having that, like just understanding that of your rifle and knowing like how your rifle drops, you can picture that drop in many ways and just know how to hold your rifle and where to hold your rifle. So I think that sometimes we get all this really good technology that makes us better, and we lose the basic skills of, understanding rifle drop, being able to throw the gun up and make a good shot. There's a lot to be said for that. I think some of the best hunters in the world don't have that technology, or some of the best shots, because they really are familiar with their weapon, whatever it is. Same with a bow, a rangefinder. I rely on my rangefinder. I have a single pin sight, but I also shoot a lot of traditional, and I'll even shoot my bow with just not even setting that sight on something, and just using that, understanding that drop of just being super familiar with what I'm using, because it just builds this mental picture of being better with the stuff that you have. But when it comes to making a super precise shot, yeah, using the technology available is great. But I think in practice it's fun to grab a 22 and go out there and just understand the drops of guns and shoot at things. Yep. He asked if I think we're going to have to limit our technology someday. I think so, in some ways. And I think maybe, I think that me personally, I found, I've done it all. And as far as I've jumped on the train of doing long range shooting and shooting things far. And at the time when I started doing that, it was new to me, and it was a challenge. And so I liked that challenge of long range shooting. And then it became too easy. And now I'm now I want to hunt with a traditional muzzleloader or you know what I mean? So I think I've seen a lot of hunters kind of go that route of, we've got all this technology, and in some ways we kind of lose that aspect of the hunt that we really enjoyed, and I think that maybe it just comes from hunters' own personal hunting experience or whatever. I think I'll say this is, I don't hunt for any other reason than for myself, and when I pull the trigger, it's because it's something that I'm excited about and want to, or I look for the hunt that I'm looking for. And everyone, maybe somebody starting out, that technology is going to be imperative to their enjoyment of the sport. Having that rangefinder is going to make for more. It's made us more ethical and more successful in a lot of ways. Not just rangefinders, a lot of technology. Trail cameras is a big one, big hot topic item. Whether it's it just makes it easier for the hunter in some ways, but also sometimes it doesn't. But I do see, probably some regulations. Well, we're already seeing some of those regulations, right, with trail cameras and other things. But I think a lot of it too might just be hunters choosing to do kind of different types of hunts, or choosing to hunt with different types of things. I don't know. I think that's up for debate.
Yeah. We're up against it on time, unfortunately. I'd love to go on and on. This has been super informative. I've learned a lot. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. For all the great questions out there, thank you. And thank you for joining us virtually online. Remi, I'm sure we'll be seeing you around, on TV and online, and certainly through Western Hunter Magazine. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the Sheep Show.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I appreciate y'all. Also, in a little bit, I'll be over at the Schnee's booth. It's in the back over here. They've got a little beer hour going on, so I'll be hanging out back there. Appreciate you guys, everyone, for coming out, and yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're inviting us to beer hour?
Yep, beer hour.